The smell of disinfectant still takes me back to that night. The floor tiles glowed under the sterile lights,
Keep moving,
slick
we're
with
almost
blood,
there.
her blood,
hurts so much.
and somewhere down
I
the
know.
hall,
Lean on
an
me.
alarm
Don't let
kept
go.
beeping like it was
Clear the
mocking
way,
me.
coming through.
They wheeled her
Hang in there,
past
we're
me on a
almost there.
stretcher.
It hurts
Her
so
face
much.
was
Move,
pale,
I need clearance.
motionless, a red stain spreading across her white dress. The nurse yelled for clearance, and the doors slammed shut before I could follow. I just stood there, shaking, staring at my hands. They were sticky crimson, and I didn't even remember how. Hit like, subscribe for more betrayal stories, and comment on your city or country. A few hours earlier, Lila had called me from the office parking lot. Her voice was trembling. She said her boss had called her in to talk. That word had been poisoned lately. Ever since she told the company about the pregnancy, Grant Harlow, the man she'd given 5 loyal years to, had turned cold. He'd called her mistakes emotional lapses. He said motherhood would ruin her professional edge. I was 30 minutes away when it happened. She'd gone in to collect her things. He'd confronted her about some made-up policy breach, told her she was finished, and when she pushed back, he shoved her. The security camera caught none of it, conveniently, under maintenance. When I finally reached the building, people stood in clusters, employees whispering behind their hands, someone filming the paramedics hauling her out. I shouted her name, but the siren drowned me out. Only later did I learn that Grant stayed upstairs, poured himself bourbon, called in an after-hours meeting, and toasted to a new era. In the hospital waiting room, time lost meaning. Every color flattened into gray. The chairs, the walls, my thoughts. I replayed her smile from that morning, how she'd placed my palm on her stomach and said she could feel a flutter. I hadn't felt anything then. But now, there was only absence, a void where heartbeat should be. A doctor finally stepped out. Mid-40s, kind eyes, the kind that hesitated before speaking truth. He looked at the chart, then at me. We did everything we could. Those words didn't reach me right away. He kept talking, something about internal bleeding, shock, but the sentence that mattered came last. We couldn't save the baby. There it was. The punch I never saw coming, and it landed in a place no enemy ever could. They let me see her hours later. She was half awake, whispering in circles about stairs and cold metal edges. Her hand searched for mine, but never squeezed. I sat there until dawn hammered the horizon, listening to monitors beep like mechanical heartbeats, keeping 2 broken people alive. When she drifted back under, I stepped outside. The corridor windows faced downtown. Through the glass, I could see Grant's office tower glowing like nothing had happened, like he hadn't stolen a future from us. A janitor passed behind me and mumbled, "Rough night." I nodded, unable to speak, because rage lived in my throat like a blade. Morning brought reporters. No arrests. The company's statement called it a tragic accident. HR used words like condolences and valuable employee. I stared at the screen showing Grant leaving the building, sunglasses hiding his eyes, smile hiding his soul. The caption read, Harlow Industries CEO to launch scholarship in support of women's safety. He'd turned her fall into publicity. That's when something inside me hardened. I wasn't thinking of vengeance then, not yet. I was thinking about the look in his eyes when he said it was her fault. I wanted him to understand fear, real fear, the kind that creeps in when you realize no one's coming to save you. They moved Lila to a private ward. The doctors told me she'd recover physically, but emotionally, it would take time. Talk to her gently. One nurse whispered, keep her in light. I tried, reading her favorite poetry, bringing food she didn't touch, flowers she didn't see. Sometimes she'd flinch when footsteps echoed in the hall, as if Grant might step through the door again. A few nights later, I woke to her soft sobbing. They said I slipped, she whispered. They think I made it up. I couldn't answer. If I did, she'd hear the truth in my voice, that the law never cared unless profit was injured. I left the room quietly, walked down to the vending machine, punched the glass once. A nurse warned me to calm down. I didn't, because calming down meant accepting. Back home, the crib we'd ordered sat in unopened boxes. The nursery smelled like new paint, and betrayal. I stood there, thinking maybe if I dismantled it piece by piece, I could undo what happened. But all it did was spread the silence wider. That night, someone sent me a video from the corporate party. Grant sat at a polished bar, glass raised. Behind him, the same staircase where she'd fallen gleamed under chandeliers. He laughed, saying, "Accidents happen, but business goes on." People around him cheered. I dropped the phone. My breath came slow, deliberate. Years of military conditioning teaching me not to react, only to plan. I drove back to the office building the next evening. Security had taped off the stairwell, but I stood behind the barrier anyway. The stains were gone. The air smelled of bleach. Only the echo of my boots reminded me life and death could exist in the same square of tiles. In reflection of a glass door, I saw myself, hollow-eyed, hands balled to fists, and for the first time, I noticed how still everything inside me had become. Not calm, not peace, something colder. This wasn't rage anymore. It was focus. I whispered under my breath. "You took everything that gave me light. Now I'll show you how darkness moves." When I returned to the hospital, Lila was asleep again, face turned to the window. Outside, rain carved small rivers down the glass. I sat beside her bed, speaking low enough that only ghosts could hear. "You rest now. I'll take it from here." Her fingers twitched, barely a movement, but it felt like permission. Down the hall, an orderly pushed a cart, wheels squeaking in rhythm with my heartbeat. Somewhere in the building, a generator hummed. The world felt mechanical, soulless, except for one fragile pulse beneath my palm. In those quiet minutes before dawn, I remembered something an old Delta instructor once said: "Revenge isn't action, it's restraint. You don't rush justice, you build it." At the time, it was just tactical wisdom. Now, it was prophecy. I looked over at Lila, her chest rising and falling under white sheets. For her, I'd uncover every truth the law ignored. If the world chose blindness, I'd teach it to see my way. The monitor beside her spiked briefly, then steadied into rhythm, almost like she understood. Morning light crept through the blinds in thin silver lines, painting stripes across the hospital wall. Lila was still asleep, her breathing shallow but steady. The machines whispered their endless mechanical prayers, and for a second, I wished the room would forget time the way we did. A nurse changed her for, moving carefully like not to wake pain. I stared at the faint bruise on Lila's collarbone, that fingerprint-shaped bruise nobody cared to note in their reports. In their world, bruises fade. In ours, they multiply inside. The hospital released her 3 days later, wrapped in blankets and silence. The drive home blurred by in gray tones. Rain whispered on the windshield, and every drop sounded like something left unsaid. At home, every corner remembered her laugh, the one that used to float through the house when she blended a morning smoothie or sang along to the old country station. Now, the sound was gone, replaced by the hum of our refrigerator and the ticking clock that refused to die down. The crib waited in the nursery, untouched. I closed the door before she saw it. She wandered to our bed, stood there for a long moment, then lay down without changing. I wanted to promise it would all make sense someday, but lies are just crushed hope with better packaging. Nights turned long. She stopped eating. She stopped talking. Sometimes, I'd catch her staring at her own reflection, like she was trying to see what version of herself survived that stairwell. I didn't interrupt. You can't rush grief. You can only guard it like a candle in wind. Outside, the world carried on. Grant's corporate empire grew louder. News feeds ran his charity events, his smiling face beside mayors and donors. A man of community, they called him. The same mouth that once shouted at my wife for daring to ask for maternity leave. I visited the precinct twice. First time, they took my statement politely. Second time, they took it like a favor. No solid witnesses, one officer said. Camera malfunctioned. When I pushed harder, he warned me to move on. Move on. That phrase thudded inside my skull every time I replayed the fall in my head. No other battlefield had ever made me feel this helpless. Out there, enemies showed faces. Here, they wore suits and smiled through press conferences. Weeks passed. Lila's wounds healed, at least on paper. Her belly no longer carried life. Her smiles no longer carried warmth. Some nights, she dreamt, kicked, gasped, and woke up clawing at her own chest. I held her until morning muted the shaking, but she never remembered. One evening she came to the kitchen, her voice tiny, foreign. "Did you know they deleted the security footage?" I nodded. "Then they'll think it was my fault forever," she said. I told her the truth would find its way. I didn't say whose hands it would travel by. I took to running late at night, when streets were empty and thoughts had fewer witnesses. Passing storefronts, I would see my reflection blur in the glass, hood up, eyes fixed forward. I started mapping patterns, addresses tied to Grant's company, bars his executives drank at, the routes his car took leaving headquarters. Habits reveal weakness. I'd been trained to watch. One Thursday, I saw him at the Redwood Club, a private bar draped in gold-framed mirrors and arrogant laughter. He was surrounded by men too rich to feel mortal, women too expensive to feel guilt. Grant lifted a glass and toasted again. "To second chances," he said, smiling like he'd earned them. I didn't go in. I just stood across the street, watching the reflection of his drink tremble in the window light. Thunder rolled somewhere far away, and for once, nature seemed to agree with me. A few days later, an envelope arrived on our doorstep. No sender. Inside, an official notice stamped "case closed." Words like insufficient evidence and accidental fall printed in black on white, sterile as the hospital walls had been. Lila read it once. Her lips parted, no sound came. She placed it on the table, turned, and walked back to the bedroom. The door shut quietly, but the silence that followed was louder than any scream. I stayed there staring at that letter. Paper can weigh more than bullets when it carries cowardice. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the porch, moonlight carving outlines of our garden fence. The city looked peaceful from here, but somewhere out there lived a man who decided lives like God flipping coins. For years, I told myself violence never solved anything. Tonight, I wasn't sure I believed that anymore. Toward dawn, I opened an old footlocker in the garage. Inside, dust, a uniform, and a few folded memories from another life. Dog tags, field notes, a pair of gloves I swore I'd never wear again. The metal was cold and smelled faintly of the past. I didn't take them out yet. Not tonight. But touching them reminded me of something crucial, the discipline of patience. A soldier doesn't act from rage, he builds strategy. And that realization was scarier than anger. It meant I was settling into purpose. When I went back inside, I found Lila sitting at the window, eyes tracing the gray edge of dawn. For the first time since the hospital, she spoke clearly. "He's free, isn't he?" I whispered, "For now." She turned her face away, but didn't cry. Maybe tears had run out. Maybe she was waiting for the world to correct itself. But the world never corrects itself. People do. Sometimes quietly. Sometimes in ways that shift the ground forever. That afternoon, the news showed Grant at a charity luncheon. Cameras caught him laughing beside a city judge, holding a champagne flute. One interviewer asked him about the unfortunate office accident. He chuckled, said, "Tragedy tests us. But we rebuild." Rebuild. The screen froze in my mind on that word. I shut off the TV, walked to the sink, and let the sound of running water fill the room until it drowned everything else. It was late evening when Lila handed me her wedding ring. "I can't wear it yet," she said quietly. I nodded. She placed it on the nightstand like it might burn her fingers. Then she lay back down, facing the wall, fading into stillness. I went outside again, this time into sharper air. From our porch, the city skyline glittered, beautiful and dishonest. Somewhere among those lights, Grant was finishing another toast, smiling over another lie. And somewhere beneath all that brightness, deep in the quiet of my chest, something patient began to move. Not revenge. Not yet. Just gravity shifting toward an inevitable weight. By the end of that week, The city felt colder, though the calendar said summer. Lila barely left the bed. She stared through me when I tried to speak, and I quit asking questions that had no gentle answers. Something inside me shifted from grief to concentration, the stillness of a man collecting coordinates before the storm. I began my mornings at a diner near downtown, coffee black, notebook closed. Around me, the same group of retirees argued baseball scores. Waitresses called me sir and asked if I wanted refills. No one noticed the man 2 booths over, Grant's driver, flipping keys on the counter after dropping the king at his tower. Patterns form when you watch long enough. I'd learned that from years of covert work overseas. Now I was using those instincts in Glass and Steel America. The day the police officially archived our case, I caught a glimpse of how deep his reach ran. A photo surfaced online from a gala the night before. The same officer who dismissed our file was smiling beside Grant, holding a plaque for community partnership. The caption might as well have read "Case closed, courtesy of influence." That image hardened every shred of mercy left in me. I started mapping faces. The building's vice presidents. The attorney who filed the falsified report. Everyone orbiting Grant Harlow's empire. I didn't know yet what I'd do with the information. Instinct just told me to gather truth before it disappeared again. Data has a way of vanishing when money decides its version of reality. One evening, I spotted a thin woman in a dark coat following the same people I was watching. She hid her camera better than most amateurs. When she stumbled while switching lenses, I recognized her. Harper Lynn, investigative journalist, the one who'd written exposes on corporate insurance fraud a few years back. I approached carefully, no sudden moves. She was the sort who reported paranoia for breakfast. "Relax," I said quietly. "We're watching the same ghost." She studied me, professional reflex measuring danger. "You lost something too." I answered, "Someone." That was enough. We became ghosts together after that moment. One fueled by justice, one by grief. Harper shared snippets from her files, internal memos, deleted complaint logs, testimonies that never reached daylight. Piece by piece, Grant's empire looked less like a company and more like organized deceit. Employees silenced, medical bills rewritten, payoffs disguised as scholarships. "Who shields him?" I asked. She smirked like someone who'd seen the devil's Rolodex. "A judge, 2 inspectors, and half of city finance. You can't climb that high without stepping on conscience." Her words weren't new, but hearing them aloud finally erased hope that the system would do the climbing for me. While she dug through digital evidence, I turned analog, old-school field craft. I trailed Grant's car across the bridge one night, ending at a warehouse on the outskirts. No logos, just a sign that read Harlow Storage Company. Men unloaded crates during hours no legitimate business used. I watched until dawn, memorizing rhythms, license plates, faces half familiar from news photos. Inside one truck, I glimpsed a crate marked with serial codes tied to government contracts I recognized from my Delta days. Connections. Money laundering disguised as supply chain. Suddenly, the Stairwell incident wasn't unique error. It was side damage in a bigger operation. That realization kept me awake the entire next night, rage threading with calculation. It wasn't just about Lila anymore. There were probably a dozen more accidents in Grant's wake, lives he filed under operational risks. Lila didn't know what I was doing. I shielded her by silence. She spent her days sketching in a notebook, shapes without faces, lines that went nowhere. Each page ended in dark smudges, as if she was trying to draw the inside of our grief. Sometimes she'd look up and ask, "You're not giving up, are you?" I'd shake my head once. In her eyes, I saw belief flicker like the final ember of something almost beautiful. A month later, Harper called past midnight. "He's hosting a private fundraiser tomorrow. Same warehouse. Word is, a few officials will attend off record." I exhaled, steady. Then that's where light begins. She warned me not to interfere, to let journalists expose him through documents. But stories like ours don't make front pages without proof that bleeds. I wasn't planning on confrontation. I was planning on presence. Sometimes, just letting darkness know it's being watched forces it to tremble. At dusk, I parked half a block from the site. Through binoculars, I saw the celebration begin. Grant shaking hands with a police captain, toasts lifted high. In one moment of arrogance, he opened a briefcase full of envelopes. Money flickered under the warehouse light, almost wholly in hypocrisy. I filmed what I could through the tinted glass. The lens caught his smile, his words, his sin. But as I zoomed out, a cold recognition hit. This scene wasn't spontaneous. Grant looked directly toward my hiding spot and raised his glass, like he already knew the camera was there. The next instant, floodlights erupted. Two guards walked straight toward my car. For the first time in years, adrenaline came not from enemy fire but corruption in tailored suits. I drove off slow, not fast. Fast means guilt. Mirrors showed them watching but not following. They didn't have to. Message received, we see you too. Later that night, an anonymous envelope slid under my apartment door. Inside, one photo. Lila leaving physical therapy, fear written across her face. No caption, no signature. A reminder, in Grant's game, no one watched was ever safe. I sat there in the dark, the image trembling between my fingers. They wanted to scare me back into ordinary civilian life. Instead, they reminded me who I used to be. I burned the photo over the sink, watched edges curl into black curls of smoke, then whispered into the flame. You think money protects you. Let's see how it does against memory. When dawn cut through curtains, I returned to the mirror. Same eyes as before, but now they looked steady, no longer searching, just waiting. Justice wasn't a prayer anymore. It was a mission file with no timestamp. Outside, sirens echoed faintly through traffic noise. I marked another point on my map, another step closer. If the law was blind, then I'd be its borrowed sight. The man above the law would soon learn what happens when truth climbs higher than his reach. Grant slept sound under penthouse glass while I studied every inch of his empire from the shadows. By week's end, I'd memorized routines, cars, meetings, even the rhythm of the guard's boots at his tower entrance. Patterns steady enough that if you breathed with them, the city itself started whispering his weaknesses. But I needed help. Not the online kind, not detectives who worked for paychecks, but someone who spoke the language of consequence. I found him past midnight, in a backroom gym where old warriors punished themselves on punching bags instead of sleeping. Dominic Hale, once my team leader, now a private security consultant for men who still thought in coordinates and kill zones. He spotted me before I spoke. You look like hell, brother. Been living there. We didn't shake hands. Soldiers don't need that when memory does the greeting. I told him everything. The fall, the baby, the silence. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he drew a slow breath. So you want to start a war in your own backyard? No, I said. Just close it. Dominic leaned back, watching the ceiling fan turn shadows across his scarred face. You remember our code. Patience, precision, permanence. You lost the first two already. Don't lose the third. He still helped. That's the thing about brothers in arms. They'll guide you away from fire while sliding a match in your pocket, just in case. By dawn, I had access to gear the world pretends doesn't exist. Mic drones, signal scramblers, ghost trackers. I wasn't turning assassin. I was turning recorder, collector of every lie that built Grant's throne. Lila knew I was leaving before I said it. She sat at the breakfast table, small sweater drowning her frame, eyes on the empty chair across from me. How long this time? She whispered. Until truth speaks. She didn't argue, just nodded, as if finally understanding that silence could be its own permission. Night operations never leave your blood. The warehouse district at 3 a.m. was a song of leaks, rats, and dripping steel. I parked 3 blocks away, moved on foot. The mod camera on my sleeve projected thermal outlines. 3 guards half asleep near the gate, 1 inside the office. Routine. I slipped through side fencing, quiet as pulse. At the far end of the lot, A low office glowed under a single fluorescent tube. Documents stacked ceiling high, humid smell of old ink. And there, taped behind a shelf panel, something small shimmered under dust. An external drive labeled with the company's internal code. I tucked it into my jacket. Mission complete feeling washed over me, cold and efficient. Years since I felt that surge, purpose pure and razor sharp. Only as I turned to leave did I notice another faint glow. A second light, smaller, blinking red. A camera. Active. Someone laughed softly through the intercom system. Not Grant, but close. Still move like a ghost, Mason, the voice said. Too bad ghosts leave prints. I backed into darkness. No footsteps followed. No alarms. Just the hum of a trap already sprung. Back home, I decrypted the drive. Files unfolded like rot. Emails, payouts, insurance adjustments, and one flagged folder named medical reports. When I opened it, Lila's name surfaced. The document predated her fall by a week. False health complaints, claims of instability, doctor's note forged with digital signature. They'd built her guilt before she ever confronted Grant. Hands shaking, I scrolled deeper. Video files labeled by dates. The last showed the night of the accident. Static, then movement, the shove. Grainy yet clear enough to freeze breath. I stopped the playback halfway. Justice required patience. Rage required space to breathe before it killed you. I saved the footage, hid duplicates across drives. Sleep never came. The city breeze outside my window pulsed blue with police sirens. Somebody else's tragedy racing through intersections. I sat there imagining that maybe, in one of those speeding cars, karma occasionally hitched a ride. Hours drifted until Dominic called. You get what you needed. Yes. Then the hard part starts. Evidence means exposure. Exposure means retaliation. I'm counting on it, I murmured. He was quiet. Don't make me pull you out, brother. You won't have to. When Lila woke, I told her only that progress had come. She smiled faintly, fingers touching my wrist, as if remembering pulse still existed. I dreamt of stairs again, she said. But this time I stood at the top. Then don't look down, I told her. We spent that morning in the garden, air smelling of wet soil and return. For the first time since the hospital, sunlight didn't feel like insult. She closed her eyes, feeling it on her skin. I watched her shoulders tremble under forgiveness she hadn't yet given, but was slowly carving from pain. It reminded me why I couldn't fail. Later, Harper called. Her voice darted with static from some public phone. Whatever you did, it's working. 2 board members resigned last night. Spooked. They found out someone has their files. You'll need to move fast before they trace the leak. But I wasn't leaking yet. I was still at phase 2, observation. The best strikes were the ones victims prepared themselves to deliver. He'd feel control slip under his own fingers long before anyone touched him. That evening, I visited my old unit's memorial wall. The names of men who'd given everything for country, but were forgotten by it. I pressed my palm against the cold marble. Their silence filled mine, each name whispering the same truth. Discipline is revenge in waiting. Back at the car, amber sunset reflected on my windshield. For a second, I caught my reflection beside a ghost of uniforms long gone. The 2 versions of me overlapped. The husband who lost everything, and the soldier reborn to finish what love started. As night bled over the horizon, a storm gathered far west, lightning veins crawling across cloud edges. The news said it might hit the city tomorrow. I smiled faintly. Storms have good timing when ghosts start moving. The first phase was done, evidence secured, weakness located, conscience buried where doubt couldn't reach it. What came next would no longer belong to patience. It would belong to purpose. The storm arrived before sunrise, rain like broken glass across the windows, thunder shaking dust from the ceiling. While the city hid under gray clouds, I sat at my desk studying the video again. Each frame of that stairwell burned deeper into memory. The way her body twisted mid-fall, the panic on Grant's face transforming instantly to cold calculation. I memorized it the way soldiers memorize maps before a breach. By noon, thunder shifted to static from my phone. Harper's name flashed once, then vanished. She called again an hour later. "I found something," she said, "and you're not gonna like it." Her voice carried exhaustion. She'd been digging through personnel archives when she stumbled on a folder marked internal disciplinary cases. Inside were redacted testimonies, not about accidents, but about victims. Employees fired, blacklisted, paid off. At the bottom of the list, two names connected: Grant Harlow and Violet Kane, Lila's closest friend from accounting. The files hinted at personal arrangements, monthly transfers disguised as consultant bonuses. I stared at Violet's name until my reflection in the monitor warped with anger. When I asked Lila about Violet, her face fell into a shadow I hadn't seen before. "She told me to quit," she whispered. "Said Grant was angry I told HR about the pregnancy. She said stepping back might save my job later." "Did you trust her?" "I thought she cared about us." Truth doesn't always detonate. Sometimes it seeps like poison, steady and silent. I drove through rain toward Violet's apartment complex without plan, just momentum. The rain slowed by the time I parked, leaving puddles reflecting neon from corner signs. Outside her unit, laughter spilled through the door, Violet's voice, another man's tone smoothing into hers. I knocked once calmly. She opened the door half drunk, eyes widening when she recognized me. "Mason, what?" Inside, her companion froze. Grant, tie loosened, bourbon glass in hand. For a heartbeat, none of us moved. He recovered first, smirking. "Domestic visits now. You really should learn to let things go." I said nothing. The silence between us was heavier than any threat. Violet grabbed his sleeve. "Grant, please." But he brushed her off, walked closer, voice dipped in arrogance. "You think this is a movie, soldier. You and your broken doll." She fell. "That's life. Some people just aren't built to handle stairs." I stepped forward until the air drew a single line between us. Every step she fell is counted. He chuckled. "Then start counting high." I turned and left. Not because of fear, because violence now would ruin the ending she deserved. At home, Lila waited in the dark. The moment she saw my face, she knew. "You went," she said. "Yes." "Is he still breathing?" "Unfortunately." She nodded slowly. "Then maybe the world still has time to see him for what he is." We spent that night talking, really talking, until dawn painted the room faint blue. For the first time, her voice carried strength instead of loss. She wanted him exposed, not destroyed. I promised both. The next afternoon, Harper arrived shaking rain from her coat. She laid her laptop on the table. "You were right. It's deeper than workplace abuse. Money laundering, forged contracts, shell companies. And Violet, she signed most of them." Harper clicked one file, emails between Violet and Grant, building a story that framed Lila as unstable, even violent. The signatures matched the forged health documents from the drive. The setup had been meticulous. "Why risk exposure for love?" I asked. "Not love," Harper replied. "Control. Grant likes owning people." Her eyes reddened. "I've seen men like him burn whole towns and hire press to sell the ashes as progress." I asked if she'd publish now. She hesitated. "Too dangerous without full proof. But with your video, maybe." "Then you'll have it," I said. "All of it." That night, while Lila slept, I backed up every fragment of evidence across cloud codes and encrypted drives, insurance in case the world tried to erase truth again. Then I watched the footage one final time, not as a husband, but as an investigator connecting fate's fingerprints. In the video's corner reflection, a mirror showed another figure, Violet, standing frozen after the push. She didn't run to help. She just checked her phone, waited, then left before the paramedics arrived. That detail cut deeper than any shove. I realized Lila's fall wasn't just spontaneous cruelty. It was loyalty being erased for convenience. By noon, the rain cleared enough for sunlight to glance off wet streets. I drove to Harper's office with the data drive sealed inside an envelope. We planned release for the following Monday, a time drop synchronized with media leaks. She promised to keep my name buried. As I stepped back onto the sidewalk, the city felt cleaner than it had in months. Pigeons scattered. Car horns bled into distance. At the corner, a black sedan idled longer than traffic allowed. I noticed the tinted plate, missing state tag numbers. Habit made me look twice. The window rolled down half an inch. Inside, Grant. Smile unchanged, eyes amused. He lifted a finger against his lips, mock shushing me. Then the car slid away into traffic. Message received again. He still owned the table, believed himself untouchable. I watched his taillights fade between rain puddles and thought, every empire ends exactly how it's built, under layers of arrogance. I texted Harper one line. Phase 2 begins. That evening, Lila found me rereading the baby's ultrasound picture. She traced the image with a trembling finger, whispering, "He'll never know what that heartbeat sounded like." I answered, "Grant will." The clouds outside gathered again, darker than before. Some storms repeat themselves until something finally breaks enough to clear the air. Before sleeping, I opened the window to the wind and listened. Somewhere across the skyline, thunder moved toward downtown, slow and deliberate, same pace as justice. The city was restless that night. Lightning cracked over rooftops while wind clawed at every billboard like it wanted the truth unwrapped. I sat alone in the dark, drive plugged into my laptop, sound dialed low. The video played again, this time in full resolution. Grainy hallway, dim office light, Grant's shadow lunging forward. Then a freeze frame I hadn't noticed before. One guard stepping from the corner, helping drag Lila's body off frame before police sirens grew faint outside. They hadn't just covered an accident. They had choreographed it. Somewhere between the static and the silence, my pulse slowed. When pain turns to data, it transforms. Each second became calculation. At 2 a.m., I called Harper. "The file's complete," I said. "You sure?" She answered, voice ragged, half whisper. "Once it's out, there's no going back." That's the point. We arranged an encrypted transfer to her newsroom servers. It would auto-post to multiple outlets if either of us went offline for more than 48 hours. Insurance against the kind of men who preferred rewriting history. But insurance doesn't save innocence. It only monitors destruction. The following evening, Harper texted, "Going dark for a bit. Sources nervous." She sent coordinates, an old industrial block near the East River. She was heading there to meet one of Grant's former accountants who wanted to talk. I offered backup. She refused. By midnight, rain turned the streets into black mirrors. I waited at home, staring at the twin blips on an app tracking her borrowed car. They moved across the map, paused near the docks for almost an hour. Then both signals vanished. I called. No answer. Again and again. An unease colder than fear settled inside me. At dawn, the news broke. Single vehicle crash off the East River Bridge. Female driver pronounced dead at scene. Foul play not suspected. The anchor's voice was detached, the way people sound when they read tragedies not their own. I muted the TV. The silence afterward felt heavier than her absence. Harper had known the rules. She still believed evidence could fight without armor. I looked at the covered drives on my desk and understood. Proof alone doesn't punish evil. It just paints a target on anyone carrying it. By noon, police arrived asking questions couched as concern. "She was working with you," one detective said. "Maybe you can help us identify what story she was chasing." Their eyes kept straying to the laptop on my table. When I didn't answer, they left a card. Names I recognized from Grant's charity network. Nice, efficient containment. When the door closed behind them, I went to the window. Lila stood in the kitchen below, making tea, motion slow and deliberate. She had no idea yet another ally had disappeared. I wanted to keep it that way, at least for a few hours longer. That night, I replayed Harper's final message in my head, her nervous laughter right before the connection dropped. If this goes sideways, tell your wife she deserved a gentler world. Those were her last words. I shut the laptop and went to the closet. The uniform still hung hidden behind civilian jackets. The fabric smelled of old metal and desert dust. My reflection in the mirror looked almost human again. Almost. I whispered to the empty room. You killed the messenger because you couldn't bribe her truth. Now you'll listen to mine. 2 days later, Grant's company released a press statement about Harper's reckless journalism. They painted her as unstable, chasing conspiracy theories. The same rhetoric they'd used against Lila. That was his pattern. Discredit, delete, deny. This time, the echo of those lies would sharpen into evidence no spin doctor could untangle. I reached out to Dominic. Need one last favor, I said. He didn't ask what. Same drop point. Yes. I'll leave it in the locker. Walk away after you take it. The locker held a small package, signal jammers, 2 surveillance mics, and a time transmitter. I didn't know yet exactly where I'd use them, only that they'd speak louder than any headline. That night, I sat beside Lila. She looked better, eyes clearer, hair pulled back, voice stronger. Tell me it's almost over, she said. Almost, I answered, and believed it for the first time. She reached for my hand. Whatever you're doing, come back the same person. I squeezed lightly. Same purpose, I said. Close enough to truth. When she slept, I stepped outside. The air smelled of wet iron. Street lamps flickered against puddles, each reflection another world waiting to be righted. I took one final look toward downtown, toward Grant's glowing tower stabbing the clouds, and promised the night, quietly but clearly, that the next sunrise would carry sound. Not sirens, not speeches. Confession. The kind that crawls out of a man's throat when the ground beneath him begins to give way. The morning after Harper's death, the world looked rinsed clean, as if the rain had tried washing its own conscience. Lila brewed coffee in silence while news anchors dissected headlines about weather hazards and reckless driving. They spoke her death into statistics and moved on to stock prices. I let them talk. Lies die slower when told beautifully. Lila caught my reflection in the window. Something feels wrong, she murmured. Everything is wrong, I said. She waited for me to soften the edges. This time I didn't. Funerals test the living more than honor the dead. Harper's was quick, the kind that ends before grief finds words. 2 journalists showed, stood apart, left before the last shovel fell. I stayed until the grave looked level enough to fool the sky. Afterward, a small card fluttered against the headstone. Her handwriting, smeared by rain. Some stories need blood to finish their sentences. I folded the card, slipped it into my pocket. That was Harper's final article, shortest one she ever wrote. Back home, the silence grew heavier. Lila stopped opening curtains. Every sound from outside startled her shoulders. One night, she woke gasping, nails digging into my arm. He won't stop, will he? He will, I promised. Soon. She pressed her forehead to my chest, whispering something that barely carried. Don't become what he made. I kissed her hair. Maybe that's what it takes to end him. She didn't argue, and that scared me most, because acceptance is what people do right before ghosts take over their eyes. I met Dominic 2 nights later at an abandoned airstrip out near Riverbend, the kind of place where echoes answer for people. He brought a box covered with tarp. Inside was concise salvation. Comms intercept gear, 2 smoke suppressors, fake credentials under tech consulting cover. He studied me through lowered brows. This isn't recon anymore. You cross now, you stay across. I'm not crossing, I said quietly. I'm finishing travel. He handed over the box. If you end up writing my name anywhere, make sure it's spelled heroically. My half-smile was enough to make him stop talking. The way soldiers say goodbye, through jokes too tired to land. That night, I revisited the warehouse district, the heart of Grant's rot. Midnight humidity hugged concrete. My breath formed thin clouds under low light. I perched across the street in a parked van borrowed from Dominic's company, signal antennas blending into the skyline. Through the mic feed, their voices crackled alive. Grant inside with his lawyer, strategizing about containment. Harper's death classified as accident. Her files scrubbed except one copy that may exist. Grant said, "The soldier's wife still breathes, but she's fading. He'll give up soon. Men like him drown in guilt before revenge." He laughed after that sentence, sound of ice tinkling in glass. Listening to him talk about my wife's grief like spreadsheet loss pulled heat to my brain. But the training still worked. I wrote every sentence down, word by word, letting anger become archive instead of explosion. When he finally left, I had enough for leverage, but not enough for destruction. Days passed as patience built scaffolding around fury. Lila's condition wavered. One morning she tried painting again, small strokes of pale blue, her hand trembling halfway through. She looked at me and asked, "Blue, because it forgives or because it hides?" "Because it waits," I said. We started talking about leaving the city after everything ended, maybe somewhere near the coast where air doesn't smell corrupt. Those were good lies. They kept her breathing hope while I packed quiet war into motion. Harper's encrypted data still ticking on a dead timer. If signals from both our accounts stayed silent long enough, the files would drop. I decided to move that deadline closer. The world deserved noise sooner. But releasing meant risk. Grant could twist exposure into martyrdom if not timed with his own confession. The tapes and his voice together would be final. So I needed him recorded again, unguarded, bragging like all tyrants do. Dominic helped trace an off-books gala Grant planned. Private coast resort, investors, small crowd of those who believe their sins dissolved in champagne. Perfect arena for truth. On the drive there, city lights gave way to forest shadows. Each mile, I replayed Harper's card in my head. Some stories need blood. Maybe she'd known from the start that exposure wasn't enough, that evil sometimes required burial deeper than law allow. When I reached the cliffside road overlooking the resort, waves crashed below like restless applause. I parked, breathed once, heavy, steady. The badge around my neck read Tech Security Advisor, ClearPass Systems. Inside, golden laughter filled corridors. Men shook hands with women who didn't remember their names. Grant stood near the bar, talking with a deputy commissioner, same man who'd ignored our report. His eyes brushed me briefly, didn't linger. I looked corporate enough. Ghosts were convincing suits. I planted one bug under the bar table's lip, another near the hall door where he liked boasting privately. Within 20 minutes, the feed on my wrist console started humming. Voices blurred, glasses clinking. Then Grant's words surfaced clear. "You can't fear publicity when you own the news," he was saying. "Accidents happen, stories fade, people forget." Laughter answered him. Another voice. "And the soldier?" "Broken," Grant said. "Still alive, but broken. He should thank me." I gave his wife a reason to finally rest. The sentence hung there long enough for thunder outside to echo it back. When their laughter filled the hall again, I pressed the transmitter's seal. Devices synced, uploaded to remote cloud networks Dominic maintained under foreign domains. I whispered inside my own head, Phase 3 complete. I started walking toward the exit. In the lobby mirror, I glimpsed Grant catching his reflection, the same mirror that caught mine moments later. We were parallel ghosts separated by glass and truth. For the first time, he looked uncertain, as if somewhere in the theater of his arrogance, he felt an unseen lens. I kept walking until moonlight guided me out to the cliff road. Behind me, the resort pulsed with hollow celebration. By dawn, news outlets began running leaked audio from an undisclosed source. Voices of powerful men making jokes about investigations, labeling victims profitable mishaps. In the background, Grant's laugh loudest. Social channels exploded. Stock values for Harlow Industries dropped 13% before noon. The empire trembled, not yet collapsed. Grant went on livestream claiming deepfake sabotage, promising to unmask the criminal cyber terrorist behind it. That criminal being me. I didn't run. I wanted him reactive, desperate, predictable. Desperation makes men sloppy. That evening, 3 unmarked cars rolled into our street. Lila watched through blinds, worry returning like color to a wound. 2 agents questioned neighbors, then left. No search warrant yet, just intimidation rounds. She turned to me. They'll come for you. They already did, I said. They just don't realize who opens the door next time. Later that night, rain began again. I sat in the garage, cleaning nothing in particular, just listening. Outside, crickets faltered under thunder. Dominic called once more. You're pushing it close, he warned. When cornered, rich wolves bite hard. Let 'em bite. Teeth break. He exhaled slowly. You always did prefer conclusion over caution. I prefer the world remembering why consequences exist. We ended call there. Around midnight, headlights flooded through our driveway. 1 car. Grant's. No guards this time. He stepped out wearing rain-soaked jacket, eyes fevered. Power gone from posture, still trying to pretend control. He rang once. I opened before he could ring twice. Enough theatrics, he snapped. You think you can ruin me with doctored files. I simply moved aside. Come in, then. Hear for yourself. He hesitated but entered, scent of wet cigar smoke following. Lila had retreated upstairs. Silence framed the room. On the laptop screen, the video looped, grainy footage, his shove, Lila's fall. He froze watching himself. There's dozens of copies, I said quietly. Each time to release with your denial statements. Grant's jaw twitched. You're bluffing. Check tomorrow's headlines if you believe in luck. He took a step closer, hands trembling. You think this makes you hero. You're just another angry man playing soldier. Maybe, I said, voice low. But angry men don't bury truth. They exhume it. For a moment it looked like he might attack. Instead, he turned toward the door, half laugh, half growl. You've destroyed yourself. He left, tires spraying mud as he sped off toward the bridge. I didn't follow. The night had its own compass for men like him. At dawn, police sirens screamed through rain again, but this time they stopped 2 blocks south. News traveled fast. Car crash on East Highway 14. Single male driver, no survivors. Investigators whispered hydroplane, possible intoxication. I walked outside when mist still clung to pavement. Lila joined me, robe wrapped tight. Is it really over? She asked. Depends what you call over, I whispered. She took my hand. Harper, the baby. They'll rest easier now. I nodded. Maybe justice can't resurrect, but it can guard the graves so no one dances over them again. We spent the next hours in quiet. Reporters camped near neighborhood entrances. Public outrage swelled. Tapes confirmed authentic. Board members resigned, facing indictments. The empire truly caved. Among clutter on the table lay Dominic's text. Mission finished. Delete footprints. Live. I thought of how many missions ended with that order. How few soldiers actually knew how to execute it. That evening, I stepped outside alone. The air smelled like after-storm soil, the kind that carries both ruin and rebirth. The city skyline flickered between power outages, almost human in its exhaustion. When thunder rumbled distant again, I whispered into the wind. Harper, it's done. Lightning answered, thin and clean. Inside, Lila sat by the window, her silhouette calm, almost translucent under lamplight. I joined her, resting my head near hers. No mercy left, she said softly. No mercy needed anymore, I replied. The rain began one final time, gentler now, like the world rinsing its hands after judgment. And in that sound, between memory and redemption, I finally heard silence that didn't hurt. Grant's death hit the media like a thunderclap that refused to fade. On every channel, his smile replayed, static-stained, framed by luxury cars and charity placards. Anchors spoke in hushed tones about tragedy and misguided success. But anyone listening closely could hear what they didn't say. Power had cracked, and the cracks were contagious. For me, though, the report wasn't conclusion. It was uncertainty in costume. Men like him never die without leaving ghosts paid to finish their work. 2 days later, I got confirmation of it. Dominic called from a burner line. Pull up the business press this morning, he said. Headlines read, Harlow Industries transfers assets to temporary executor. Vice Chair Declan Lowe. Another predator wearing familiar perfume. Declan had been Grant's shadow for years, the silent architect who wrote the corrupt contracts and played invisible during scandals. Killing the head left the body twitching, I told Dominic. He replied, then find what nerve still moves it. That night, as fog rolled across the harbor, I studied Declan's schedule the way snipers study wind. Private meetings, hidden warehouses, same beaten routes. All patterns lead somewhere if you follow long enough. But this one already felt different. Declan didn't celebrate like his predecessor. He cleaned, erasing names, moving files offshore. I realized he wasn't saving an empire. He was burning the evidence trail before fire reached him. So I built a new plan. No bullets, no chase, just exposure so loud it would leave him nowhere to hide. The same principle that guided every hunt I ever led. Position, patience, precision. Before I executed anything, I had to protect Lila. She'd begun sketching again, small bursts of color creeping back into her drawings. Still fragile, but breathing freer. I told her I'd visit an old friend for a few days, business thing. She didn't ask which friend. Trust no longer needed details. I'll leave the porch light on, she said. The phrase sounded final, like we both knew storms rarely miss twice. Dominic helped coordinate. I needed Declan believing he was chasing me, force him to step into his own trap. We created digital noise, anonymous messages from a source claiming possession of unedited tapes connecting Declan, Grant, and the judges they bribed. Within hours, I saw results. Every pattern he'd hidden flipped. Phones burned, accounts moved, calls made to overseas partners, all carefully logged by us. Keep feeding him breadcrumbs, Dominic advised, until he eats a trail straight into the grave. 3 days later, Declan arranged a so-called emergency shareholders meeting at the same desert warehouse where Grant once celebrated promotions. Perfect symmetry. Darkness loves familiar settings. I planned to attend, uninvited. The kit I carried was minimal. Pocket recorder, tranquilizer pistol, rope ties, and the same flash drive shaped like coincidence. Old habits, handy when justice lacks format. At dusk, I reached the site. Storm clouds crouched low again. Desert air tasted like copper. Inside, generators hummed. I slipped through a broken side door. Ghosts always know the neglected path. Through cracked panels, I watched Declan pacing near a portable bar, phone pressed to his ear. His voice, sharp and panicked. Delete everything, no, everything. Others around him traded nervous glances. Not one of them noticed the small red light blinking from the doorframe camera I'd installed earlier that afternoon. He hung up, sweat beading along a face that had never sweated for labor. It's one man, he barked. You let one man turn us into criminals. A guard muttered. Sir, technically we are. Declan struck him across the mouth. No one says that word again. I waited until the shouting died. Then I triggered the jamming signal. Phones went dark, radios silent. A generator hiccuped under voltage spike, plunging half the room into shadow. I stepped out from behind the crates. My voice stayed steady. You should really fire your security consultant. Declan spun, eyes wide. You, relax, I said. I already buried the last man who enjoyed surprises here. He stumbled backward. Grant's death was accident. Everything in your world seems to be. He lunged toward the exit. I met him halfway. The tranquilizer hissed once, barely audible, but he folded like wet paper. I grabbed his collar, dragged him across the concrete. The guards outside, oblivious, probably thought he'd passed out drunk like their last boss. I hoisted him into the back trench behind the warehouse, a construction pit half filled with water from recent storms. Truth has its own poetry. When he woke, tied to steel pipes, panic bloomed instantly. Please, listen, we can deal. I crouched nearby, voice calm. I am listening. Tell me where you hid every document linking the payments. He gasped through rain. It's safe drive, office vault downtown. Code VL03. I noted it silently, then switched on the portable recorder. Say it again, I ordered. He did, sobbing through it, naming the judges, the officials, the hidden accounts. Every confession sealed by fear and lightning. When he finished, I stood. Congratulations. You just wrote your own obituary. No, you need proof alive, he begged. There's already enough proof. You're just icing. I left him there, conscious and screaming under thunder. Before disappearing into the dark, I tossed the flashing beacon beside him, emergency distress strobe. Within minutes, nearby patrol would see it, pull him out, and hear every word already recording on repeat. By dawn, the footage of his confession hit legal inboxes, journalist feeds, and global forums. Overnight, Declan Lowe became the missing link in a chain of guilt stretching through courts and boardrooms. Panic rippled across state lines. Lawsuits, resignations, chaos, pure and clean. Dominic called, voice tinged with morbid amusement. Guess hell finally got crowded. Let it, I said. He chuckled dry. So what now, Mason? Now I go home. Home smelled of rain and paint. Lila was sketching again when I walked in, back to the door, music soft behind her. When she turned and saw me, relief tremored through every pore of her face. I heard on the radio, she said. They're finally saying his name. Them all, I corrected. Her eyes glistened, not from grief this time, from vacuum finally filled. Can we stop running now? I nodded. We never ran. We just waited for the world to catch up. She smiled faintly, almost shy. You look different. Lighter. Alive. That night, she slept sound while I sat by the window, watching lightning crawl far across open sky. Every flash reflected off puddles like multiple realities splitting and merging again. Somewhere in that light lived everything that had been taken from us. Child, laughter, trust, passing into something quieter but not lost. I thought of Harper, of Dominic, of every name buried under other people's excuses. Justice hadn't resurrected them, but maybe it bought silence in which they could finally rest. At 3 a.m., wind carried faint sirens from downtown, FBI vans sealing the last warehouse. The city finally clearing its throat to speak plain truth. I whispered to the dark, it's done. But conscience doesn't shut down orders that easily. There's always debrief. In my dreams, I stood again at those stairs. Only this time, Lila never fell. She turned, smiled, walked back toward me. I woke before she reached. Always before. Morning broke clean. Sunlight streamed across the floor like forgiveness. I brewed coffee, set 2 cups. Lila stirred, hair haloed by morning. Smells different, she joked. Tastes earned, I said. We drank in silence, the way soldiers share water after battle, half gratitude, half disbelief. Outside, the world kept moving, but the noise now belonged to others. From somewhere within that quiet, I realized revenge hadn't saved us. Truth had simply stopped pretending it couldn't fight back. And for the first time in months, I allowed a small peace to exist without suspicion. Sunlight came with an honesty I hadn't seen in months. It flooded through the curtains, lay gold on Lila's face, and stayed there like it finally belonged. She kept her eyes closed a moment longer than usual, maybe afraid waking would break the peace too quickly. For once, neither of us moved to check the news. When I did, it wasn't headlines that mattered. It was silence between them. No denials, no covers. Declan Lowe's recorded confession had detonated across every network overnight. Judges suspended, assets frozen, investigation units forming around the ashes of a corporation that believed itself immortal. Lila came beside me, robe gathered tight. It's over, right? Over enough, I said. The rest's paper. She nodded, then added softly. Paper still matters when it names the guilty. By noon, reporters filled the streets outside our subdivision. They interviewed neighbors who never suspected, camera flashes catching slices of our porch. Dominic texted, "Stay in shadows. Heroes don't survive fame." He knew me too well. Fame is another battlefield, one that feeds on what little of you is left. We packed a small bag, 2 changes of clothes, her sketchbook, the baby's ultrasound tucked inside the pages. I told her we'd go inland for a while, somewhere quiet. "Just till this noise forgets our address," I said. She replied with faint smile, "You think noise forgets?" We reached the cabin by dusk. Dominic arranged it, off-the-grid property near a lake that caught the sky like mirror. The crickets there weren't afraid to sing, and that alone felt like miracle. Inside, walls smelled of cedar and isolation. Lila walked room to room, touching surfaces like she was mapping a new world. Then she found the view, wide water bordered by pine, nothing else in sight. Her breath hitched. "It's peaceful," she said, half-question. "It's earned," I answered. We built a small fire, even though the evening was warm. Habit. Humans create light when they need proof of survival. Later I stepped outside. The lake's surface was glass except where insects made rings. Overhead, stars scattered like steel dust. I thought of everything buried under this same sky. Harper in her dirt bed, Grant under twisted metal, Declan facing interrogations that would turn into life sentences. Justice wasn't a bright sword. It was slow water, shaping stone until the shape remembered what truth looked like. Inside, Lila slept curled on the couch, fire reflecting off the delicate scars near her wrist. The sight pulled breath from me, because healing looks so still you forget how loud it cost. Next morning, a courier jeep arrived. Dominic again, always materializing when silence got too steady. He dropped off a thick envelope, saluted between sarcasm and affection, said, "Closed case files. They've ruled Harper's death homicide now." Someone remembered integrity. He also dropped a small wooden box. "Something you left behind, brother." Inside, the Delta badge I'd buried in a field months ago, polished, engraved with new serial number. He'd retrieved it. I asked why. He said, "Because ghosts deserve graves, not timelines." Then drove off before I could thank him. I spent the afternoon reading the papers Dominic delivered, official statements, autopsy confirmations, final signatures. The baby's name, though never registered, appeared once in Lila's victim impact statement. If truth had a heartbeat, we'd have called him Noah. I stopped reading after that for a long time. Near sunset, Lila joined me by the dock. She placed a small watercolor canvas on my lap. It showed stairs vanishing upward into light, 2 faint silhouettes walking beside each other. "For us," she said, "no more falling." The wind carried across water so gentle it almost sounded like applause. When night settled, I opened my phone for the first time in weeks. Messages from unknown numbers poured in, survivors, ex-employees, families thanking a stranger for forcing light into sealed rooms. I read a few aloud to Lila. One line stayed with me. "Sometimes revenge looks like peace relearning your name." She squeezed my hand. Neither of us spoke after that. There was nothing left worth putting into language. 2 days later, reporters found the lake house. We left before they reached the gate. No more interviews, no storytelling for profit. The world could speculate. Truth didn't need another witness. Before leaving, Lila buried the ultrasound under the pine tree near the dock. "He'll grow here, in quiet," she said. I carved a small wooden cross above it with my knife, then staked the Delta badge beside. Soldier and child, 2 lives that never got to finish properly. Rain began again, soft as breathing. She leaned against me. "You ever think about how all of this started?" "Every day," I answered. "And how it ends? Not with us. Because some stories end by beginning new ones for people who'll never know the names that bled for their safety." We drove back toward the city only once, to face courtroom light. Lila testified calmly, describing cruelty in words that trembled but never broke. Judges listened. Cameras clicked. The process took months, but time had learned compassion again. By verdict day, Declan Lowe was convicted on every charge. His sentence echoed across the chamber like final punctuation. As we walked out, Lila released a breath that looked almost like relief. I asked, "How do you feel?" "Empty in the right way," she said. Outside, journalists shouted questions. We kept walking, hands clasped but heads high. Behind those courthouse doors, the ghosts finally stopped screaming. Months later, we moved south, to a town where nobody connected us to anything. I found part-time work repairing boats. Lila opened a small studio near the docks, teaching painting to locals. Kids called her Miss Lila. Her laughter came back in quiet bursts, spontaneous as rain. Sometimes, in the middle of routine, I'd catch her staring toward the horizon with that same wondering calm, as if asking the ocean whether peace was just a longer kind of waiting. At night, when gulls settled and docks creaked, we'd sit together, no more talking about justice or loss, just breathing in the sound that replaced them. The world moved on, as it always does. Harlow Industries dissolved into fragments bought by strangers. Awards were granted to the brave journalists who finished Harper's leaks. Her face appeared briefly on memorial broadcasts, then faded like most truths after their moment. I kept the original tape locked in a small safe under the bed, a relic and reminder. Some nights, I watched the opening frame just to remember how much silence costs before it becomes peace. And when the guilt crawls back, I go down to the docks and stand knee-deep in water, letting the tide pull at my scars until they feel lighter. That's when I hear Harper's words again, whispering through that restless wind. Some stories need blood to finish their sentences. Maybe ours was one of those. The morning after the last court appeal, Lila woke first, brushed her hand through my hair, and smiled so simply it hurt. "Today, no ghosts," she said. "No ghosts," I echoed. Out the window, sun spilled over waves, clean, unpromising, real. That was enough. Courtrooms have their own climate. Air recycled too often, lighting too white to be mercy. The week of the trial, that chill settled into my bones like an old deployment. Different war, same tension before the first shot. Lila sat beside the prosecutor, hair pulled back, eyes steady. She'd refused to hide behind victim statements typed by someone else. She wanted her own voice to weigh the scale. Watching her walk to the stand was harder than any mission I'd carried out. Declan Lowe looked smaller behind the defendant's table, wrists cuffed, tie crooked, skin pale from months in custody. But arrogance dies slow. He still smirked when the cameras flashed. The judge called order. Sunlight knifed through tall windows, slicing motes of dust over oak benches. The prosecution began with numbers, offshore accounts, forged contracts, payoffs, to show method. Then they brought character to the math. Employees who'd lost pensions, families whose complaints vanished overnight, policemen fired for asking questions. Finally came the tapes. My recordings played through courtroom speakers like ghosts speaking into daylight. The hush that followed was thicker than walls. Declan flinched only once, hearing his own voice call Lila damage control. When they called her name, Lila rose calmly, the way people do when they've already faced worse. She took the oath, adjusted the mic, met the jury's gaze head-on. She didn't cry. Her voice, quiet but solid, drew lines through truth with surgical precision. She told them about an afternoon that began with hope, a promise of promotion, and ended in a stairwell painted red. "I remember his face more than the pain," she said. "The face of someone proud of ending a problem he created. That's what you call power when it forgets responsibility." The room stayed silent until the judge cleared his throat, fighting his own composure. When cross-examination tried twisting her words, she didn't flinch. Every trap laid ended up revealing more of Declan's callousness. You can't outmaneuver a woman who's already fallen from the highest place and survived. My turn followed. Taking the stand felt like stepping back into gunfire, but this time with purpose that didn't require orders. I spoke of evidence, how it came to me, how I verified every bite, why I stayed anonymous until safety allowed. They asked if I regretted leaking information without approval. I regret trusting people who needed approval to do right, I answered. A few jurors dropped their eyes, some nodded. The defense had little left except desperation. They claimed the confessions were coerced, that I'd manipulated audio. The judge ordered forensic exam. Experts confirmed integrity. By day 3, Declan stopped smirking altogether. During recess, Dominic showed up at the back, civilian suit, beard longer, eyes still scanning exits like battlefield walls. He handed me coffee, whispered, "Almost done, brother." "Almost," I said. He looked toward Lila. "Tougher than any unit I've seen. Because she fights for life, not orders." He grinned, proud and weary. "When it's over, disappear properly this time." Closing arguments came like closing wounds, slow, painful, necessary. Prosecutor spoke first. "We can't bring back the dead, but we can sentence the deceit that made them so." Defense countered with manufactured humanity. Declan as a man who lost direction. The jury read through it as easily as smoke. The verdict arrived 2 days later under a rain that hammered courthouse glass like drum rolls. Guilty on all counts. 75 years, no parole. When the gavel hit wood, the sound felt final, heavier than thunder, but cleaner somehow. Lila's shoulders relaxed for the first time in years. Reporters shouted. She ignored them, eyes focused only forward. Outside, cameras flashed. Dominic shielded her path with a quiet authority that made photographers lower lenses. Across the square, a group of ex-employees waited holding small photos, Grant's victims, Harper's face among them. They clapped as Lila walked past. Not applause for vengeance, for endurance. She turned to me then, voice barely a whisper under the rain. "Do you feel free?" "Freedom's too big a word," I said. "But I can breathe again." She half smiled. "Then that's enough." That night we drove to the lake and let the storm chase us there. Rain tapped on the windshield like ghosts saying goodbye. We parked near the dock, sat silent, letting the sound write its own prayer. For once, I didn't look over shoulders or check mirrors. The world had finally aligned with truth, if only temporarily, and that was all we'd ever asked. Weeks passed. The story faded to evening news updates, then to documentaries narrated by voices detached from the blood they described. People moved on. Maybe that's the best sign of justice, when it stops needing headlines. One afternoon, I found Lila painting again on the porch. Colors richer, strokes confident. She looked up. "It's strange," she said. "Peace doesn't roar. It just whispers until you notice." I smiled. "Whispers good. We've heard enough shouting." Morning came like a quiet promise, the kind that doesn't shout, doesn't beg, just exists. The lake shimmered under soft sunlight, moving gently as if the world had finally exhaled. I stood on the dock with coffee cooling in my hands, watching mist lift from the water the same way anger lifts when it has nowhere left to live. Behind me, Lila hummed faintly, cleaning brush handles, sunlight finding strands of her hair. Peace had slowly made a home in the places where rage used to stay. That peace felt earned, scarred, real. Months had passed since the verdict. Declan's empire was dismantled, his partners naming one another to survive shorter sentences. The city returned to noise without corruption steering it, and headlines moved on to newer disasters. Justice never rewinds the clock. It simply stops the worst hands from turning further. We'd made a small life beside the lake. Her painting, me repairing boats for the locals. Days measured by tides instead of tension. Every evening, she'd light a lantern on the dock for Harper and the baby we never got to meet. She called it their light. Sometimes I'd sit there after she went inside, listening to frogs and wind ripple against wood. In that stillness, guilt finally sounded smaller than gratitude. We weren't the same people who'd started this story. Maybe that was the whole point of living through it, to leave behind the versions of ourselves built around pain. One night, as the lantern flame flickered, Lila joined me with 2 mugs of tea. She looked across the water and whispered, "Do you ever wonder if he understood what he'd done before it ended?" I thought for a while before answering. Maybe, but understanding doesn't save a soul. She nodded. No, but truth does bury it. That word, bury, didn't sound like revenge anymore. It sounded like peace. Seasons turned quietly. Spring painted wildflowers along the shore. Laughter returned in small ways. Neighbors started visiting, bringing stories that didn't bleed. We learned to listen without measuring honesty by pain. And sometimes, on clear nights, Lila would tell me she thought she heard Harper's voice in the wind. Only one line, faint but familiar. Some stories need blood to finish their sentences. I'd always answer softly. Ours wrote its last line. Now, standing on that same dock, I look straight into the camera of this life we built, and I wonder something I can only ask you. The ones who watched, listened, felt every beat of this journey with us. If you lost everything, would you choose revenge or healing? If you knew healing meant forgiving without forgetting, tell me in the comments below.